Hello, everyone, and a special hello if you're tuning in from Westferry Times. Thanks so much for watching.
Great to be here.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something that's really shaking up UK politics, I think. Reform UK's breakthrough in the local elections.
Yeah, it's definitely raised a lot of eyebrows, hasn't it?
It feels like they've gone from, the fringes right into the main political discussion. Lots of questions about what it all means.
Absolutely. These results, they weren't just a blip. It suggests there's some real momentum there, something definitely worth digging into.
And to help us do that, we're joined today by Thomas Reed. Thomas is a well-known political analyst, broadcaster, and also a fellow at the Institute for Public Affairs. It's fantastic to have your insights on this.
Thanks for having me. It's certainly a fascinating time in politics.
So let's dive right in then. What really stood out for you about Reform UK's performance in these local elections? What's the big story?
Well, I think what's really striking is how tangible their progress felt this time. They've polled reasonably okay for a while, but these elections, they actually turned that into votes on the ground.
Okay.
Getting over 6% of the national vote share in local elections. That's quite something.
And they put up more candidates than before, too.
A record number, yes.
Hmm.
Which shows, a bit more organizational muscle growing. But the key thing, really, the most telling sign, they actually won council seats.
Right.
For the first time since they rebranded from the Brexit Party. That's a big step, moving beyond just being a sort of protest vehicle.
Winning actual seats feels like a different level entirely. Where did we see them making these kinds of impacts?
And we saw them making waves in places like Sunderland, Bolton, Dudley was another one.
Okay.
In some local wards, they won outright, which is obviously huge for them. But just as important, I think, was what happened elsewhere.
How so?
Well, even where they didn't win, they took a significant slice of the vote. Often, it looked like it came straight from the Conservatives.
The vote-splitting effect.
Exactly. Enough to let Labour, or in some cases the Lib Dem candidate, sneak through. So they're influencing results even when they don't take the seat themselves.
And politically, where do they sit? What's the core appeal that's allowing this?
They've very deliberately positioned themselves to the right of the current Conservative Party. Their core message is pretty clear, focused on three main things: slash immigration, cut taxes, and cut red tape.
Simple, direct messages.
Very. And it seems to be resonating, particularly with voters who feel maybe the main parties aren't really delivering on those fronts, especially, it seems, in some working class areas where perhaps old loyalties are fading a bit.
Okay, so for anyone listening who maybe hasn't followed every twist and turn, could you give us a quick reminder? Who are Reform UK today? Where did they spring from?
Sure. So Reform UK is basically the follow-on from the Brexit Party.
Right, Nigel Farage's party.
Exactly. The one he founded, which obviously played a massive role in the whole Brexit process. After the UK left the EU, Farage sort of stepped back from the leadership.
And that's when Richard Tice came in.
That's right. Richard Tice, a businessman, quite prominent, took over the leadership.
And how has he shaped the party since then? What's the Tice stamp on it?
Well, Tice has really leaned into hardening their identity as an anti-establishment force. Sovereignty, that Brexit echo, is still there, definitely. But he's broadened it out. It's now much more about tapping into a wider kind of populist feeling, big focus on low taxes, the idea of money back in your pocket, and a strong sense of national control over things.
So it's moved beyond just being the Brexit Party Mark II.
Oh, absolutely. Brexit was the launch pad, but now they're campaigning hard on a whole range of other things that are clearly, bothering a lot of voters.
Oh, Chaz.
Well, immigration is still huge for them, obviously. But also the cost of living crisis, a lot of skepticism about net zero targets, the environmental goals, and even things like NHS reform. They're actively looking for those pressure points, those issues where people feel the mainstream parties just aren't listening or aren't acting.
This must be giving the Conservative Party quite a headache. How are they likely seeing this rise?
Oh, undoubtedly. What's really interesting, or worrying for them, is how directly reform seems to be chipping away at the traditional Conservative base.
Especially in those red wall seats.
Precisely. Those areas in the North and Midlands that the Tories worked so hard to win, often appealing to working-class Brexit-supporting voters, reform is making inroads there.
So it's not just about whether reform can win seats themselves in a general election. It's the spoiler effect, too.
Exactly that. Even in these local elections, you saw it. Reform might not win the council seat, but they take, say, 5 or 10% of the vote.
That might otherwise have gone Tory.
Right. And in tight races, that's enough. It hands the win to Labour or the Lib Dems. So this isn't just symbolic. It's having real, actual electoral consequences right now.
It does feel a bit like the pressure UKIP put on the conservatives back in the day. Similar dynamic.
There are definitely parallels, yeah. That dynamic of a smaller party hitting specific concerns hard and peeling off voters from a major party.
Hmm.
You can even look further back, maybe to vote splitting in the 90s. The crunch point now is, if reform keeps this level of support or builds on it, heading towards a general election, well, the conservatives could genuinely lose dozens of seats because of it.
How effectively are the conservatives actually responding to this threat so far?
It looks like they're finding it really difficult, to be honest. They're caught in the classic bind.
How so?
They need to somehow keep their right-leaning base happy, the voters tempted by reform's message. But if they move too far right on issues like immigration or tax...
They risk losing moderate voters in the middle ground.
Exactly. The center ground voters they also need. So reform's rise is really forcing the conservatives to ask some tough questions about who they are, what they stand for, especially on immigration, and crucially, can they win back the trust of those voters feeling let down?
Let's grill down a bit into those voters. Who exactly is making up reform's support base at the moment? What do we know?
Well, it seems to be a coalition, really, of a few key groups. First, you've definitely got those original Brexit voters, people who feel maybe Brexit wasn't delivered as they hoped, or the establishment kind of watered it down.
Okay, that makes sense. Who else?
Then there's a chunk of, let's call them disenchanted conservative voters, maybe small business owners, perhaps some pensioners, who feel the current Conservative Party isn't really representing their interests or values anymore.
So primarily drawing from the right.
Mostly, but interestingly, not entirely. We're also seeing some traction among working-class voters, especially in the North and Midlands.
People who might have traditionally voted Labor.
Potentially, yes. Voters who perhaps feel a bit disconnected from where the Labor Party is now. Reform's message on immigration, on national identity, that can sometimes resonate with voters who feel maybe Labor isn't focused on their specific concerns.
What about age demographics? Are younger people getting on board?
Right now, their core strength seems to be more with the 45-plus age group. Slightly more men than women, too, often.
But they are trying to reach younger people.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You see them quite active on platforms like TikTok, YouTube. They're visible there.
Yeah.
Whether that translates into actual votes from younger demographics down the line, well, we'll have to see. But they're clearly making an effort to broaden out.
Do you think this current support could solidify, become a more permanent fixture, a stable movement?
It's possible. It really is. If they can manage to expand their appeal beyond just immigration and that general anti-system feeling.
What would that take?
Well, probably more detailed policies across the board.
Yeah.
Showing they have answers on the economy, on healthcare, beyond the headlines. And, frankly, probably more party discipline, better organization on the ground. Building that kind of lasting base takes more than just tapping into frustration.
Let's shift to how they're getting their message across. What's their strategy there? How are they communicating?
I'd say their messaging strategy is all about being direct.
Yeah.
Very simple, very emotionally driven.
Like the examples you gave earlier.
Exactly. Stop the boats, freeze the green levies, put Britain first. Short, punchy slogans that connect with people's gut feelings.
And that helps them cut through.
Yeah, it cuts through all the, the complex language and maybe the perceived hedging you get from mainstream politicians. It's very clear what they sound like they stand for.
And the media's role in all this? How much coverage are they getting, and does it help?
It's definitely played a part. You could argue they get media attention that's maybe out of proportion to their actual elected strength right now.
Why is that?
Well, often because some of their positions are quite controversial, right? That generates headlines, it sparks debate, gets people talking.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also very smart about using other channels. They're not just relying on traditional media.
Like what?
Podcasts, YouTube shows, doing Facebook Live town halls, ways to speak directly to their potential supporters, bypassing the usual media filters.
Of course, the elephant in the room, often with reform, is Nigel Farage. There's always talk, will he come back properly? What difference would that make?
It's the perennial question, isn't it? Look, Richard Tice has led the party effectively since he took over. But there's no denying Farage's star power, his profile.
He's a different level of political celebrity.
He really is.
Yeah.
If he were to return to frontline politics, especially, say, for a general election campaign, that would massively boost reform's visibility and, likely, their support. He could really energize their base and possibly pull in even more voters.
Mm-hmm.
He could make them a much bigger spoiler, or even potentially push them towards winning seats.
So Looking towards that next general election, probably sometime in 2025, what are the big picture implications of this local election success for UK politics overall?
I think it points toward an ongoing fragmentation. The old two-party dominance just isn't as solid as it once was.
Hmm.
And reform success, it taps into this sort of demand for disruption, for something different. It might be less about pure ideology and more about shaking things up.
What does that mean for the main parties then?
Well, for the conservatives, as we've said, if they can't win back those reform-leaning voters, Labor could certainly benefit in lots of seats from that split vote.
But it's not guaranteed good news for Labor.
Not necessarily. If reform keeps growing, it just makes the whole picture more complicated, more unpredictable. It could fragment the right-of-center vote so much that forming a stable majority becomes harder for anyone.
And is it actually realistic now to think Reform UK could win seats in Parliament at a general election?
I think it's moved into the realm of definite possibility, yes. Especially perhaps in constituencies with low turnout, where the margins are already tight between Labor and the Conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
And look, even if they only won a handful of seats, say 2 or 3 MPs, that would give them a huge platform in Westminster, much more legitimacy, much more media focus. It would really amplify their voice.
Finally then, should Labour and the Lib Dems just see reform as a problem for the Tories? Or is there a risk for them too?
Oh, definitely not just a Tory problem. They absolutely shouldn't assume that.
Hmm.
In those areas we talked about, maybe former Labor strongholds where the connection has weakened,
Yeah.
reform is opportunistic. They'll target disillusioned voters wherever they find them, hitting those notes on immigration, national identity. Labor can't be complacent. And similarly for the Lib Dems, that anti-establishment vibe reform projects could potentially peel off some voters from them too. It's a threat across the board, really.
Yeah. So looking ahead now over the next, say, 12 months or so, what are the key things you'll be watching for? The indicators of where Reform UK is heading and what its impact might be.
Okay, 3 main things I'd keep an eye on. First, their local organization. Can they actually build that proper ground game? Get activists out, knock on doors consistently across the country? That's crucial for turning potential support into actual votes.
Right. The behind-the-scenes work.
Exactly. Second, Nigel Farage. What does he do next? Does he stay on the sidelines offering commentary, or does he jump back in fully? His decision will be huge. And third, just keep watching the polls, the national opinion polls. If reform starts consistently hitting double digits, say 10, 12% or more, that really changes the game. That makes the next general election incredibly complex for everyone involved.
Thomas Reed, that's been incredibly illuminating. Thank you so much for breaking that all down for us today.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you all for joining us on the Deep Dive. It's clear this is a really important story unfolding in UK politics, one with potentially big consequences down the line. Whatever your own views, we hope you stay curious and keep engaging with these issues.
Absolutely.
We'll be back soon with more deep dives into the topics that matter. Goodbye.